Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Welcome, everybody. Glad that you could get together with me tonight. I have a really super book we're going to be talking about, and I think first of all, you're going to love the interview. Second of all, you're going to want to read the book because I found it intriguing and thought-provoking and really an interesting topic. It's called Magdalene's Journey, the Untold Story of Mary Magdalene, Life and Teaching, and the authors are Renée. I'm gonna mess up their names, but it's Renée, Blodgett, and Anthony Compagnone. And I won't even try on that one to go further, but I think I came pretty close. The book is filled with deeply personal revelations and ancient yet timely wisdom. This passionate raw chronicle explores the life of Mary Magdalene, otherwise known as Miriam of Magdala. It shares Miriam's relationship with the apostles, both male and female, and her life with Yeshua, better known as Jesus of Nazareth. It is a significant upgrade to an outdated and distorted paradigm. Her story challenges a filtered and archaic narrative that has defined Abrahamic religions as well as women's pivotal role in history. Miriam's evocative and enthralling voice represents the divine feminine in all of us. In response to the distorting power for far too long, it shares the need to rebalance the masculine and feminine energy in the world, starting within each one of us. This involves understanding not just the important role of Miriam alongside Yeshua, but also the vital, never recorded roles women have played over the millennia, as well as the internal journey Yeshua taught. The kingdom lies within. Renée is amazing. Their bios could choke a horse, but I'm only going to give you a little bit of it because I want them to be able to present themselves. Renée is a novelist, curator, humanitarian, conscientious business leader, and modern mystic. She's lived multiple lives in her one, traveling around the world. She has plenty of stories to share. From riding elephants in the Indian jungle and photographing polar bears in northern Canada to teaching English in Kenya, exploring glaciers in Iceland, and selling kilums in Turkey. We got to ask her what that is. She's lived in 11 countries, including South Africa during apartheid and the Gaza Strip. Anthony is a licensed bilingual speech and language pathologist and therapist who has been working with kids and adults for over 25 years. He provides individual and or group therapy within an educational or corporate setting, and he is the founder of Speech Synergy. He's worked with school districts from New York City to San Francisco, providing collaborative and traditional speech and language services, incorporating the Common Core learning standards. Very well qualified people who have written an amazing book that you're gonna enjoy as much as I did. And I'm gonna have to read it again a couple of times to really get all the good juicy parts out of it. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thanks for having us, Barbara. We're very excited to be here.
Okay, I have to ask Renee, what's a kilum?
A kilum is like a carpet. There are digems as well in Turkey. And so there are different kinds of carpets. If you've seen those carpets that aren't soft on the top, they're more rough and raw. Those are kilums.
Okay. I could have looked it up, but it was easier to ask you. You guys have written a book that is thought-provoking, fascinating, and a lot. It puts humanity into a story that we've all heard over and over and over again, and a story that has been misrepresented over and over again over the centuries. So, what was it that inspired you to do this book?
Well, that's a great question, actually. We didn't anticipate coming out of the gate to write a book about Mary Magdalene. In fact, we didn't really know much about her up until about 6 years ago, to be honest. And then we started investigating and learning a lot more about who she was, and went down the patriarchy rabbit hole, among other things, and learned just so much about the misperceptions and the misunderstandings that people have had about her, mislabeling her and so forth. And so, that started our research. And then on top of the research,
I guess you can say this is a show that connects spirituality and science.
Yes.
Barbara, I'm a channeler. That's another profession of mine besides being a pediatric speech and language pathologist. So I've been channeling for about 11 years now, and Renee and we run a spiritual business. And one evening during our channeling, a being came through, and we've announced herself as Miriam of Magdala, or Magdala, as she'll say. And she said, I have a story to tell you. Well, we were quite incredulous, and we couldn't really believe what was coming through. But ever since then, she and the being that is referred to as Jesus, he will refer to himself as Yeshua, will come through, and they will speak, and they will tell their stories of what life was like 2,000 years ago. And so this book is part of this process of research, channeling, and narrative that's been created as a result of this.
I think one of the things that moved me at first was when she said, you've all got a wrong perception of me because of the country I grew up in, because of the society I grew up in. My skin was not white, and that I guess artists have portrayed her in ways that they thought she might have looked like, but the reality of how she actually looked was far different.
It really was. I mean, why, you probably remember this in the book. She says, well, why would anybody depict us as having, milky white, creamy skin with blue eyes when we grew up in the Middle East and we walked from village to village, in the hot, scorching sun. So she said, we had weathered skin, and, we were darker than you might imagine. And she did say that Yeshua's eye color was indeed correct. The one thing that humanity got right.
Well, after 2,000 years, anybody can make a slight error here or there.
Well, yeah, the Romans and the patriarch of the church certainly did a number to get a whole lot wrong over the years.
I would think so, because we hear the stories. The stories are preached to us, but your book makes it easier to live it, which I think made it far more educational for me to make them human. I mean, they were human. They were both in human bodies. They were having a human experience. They were spirits, but they were having a human experience. And so it made it more comfortable for me to hear you know, what she was saying about the times and how they lived and I mean, how they got from place to place and his teachings as well. It just, it made it all a little more real, actually.
Mhm.
I'm glad that you felt that way. Yeah, it's great that you felt that way, actually. That was, I don't know if we really had that as an intention.
You know, when she does come through, she is very human-like, and she has all of the human emotions. Because when she's coming through me, she will cry through me. In the very beginning, she did shed a lot of tears about what her experience was like losing Yeshua, seeing him being crucified, losing this man that she was madly in love with, and having to move to a country that wasn't hers while she was pregnant. And it is very human in nature of what she says.
And what she experienced.
And you can feel that in the writing.
This is a time when bringing forth wisdom from the past is accepted. You aren't burned at the stake anymore or anything like that. So it is easier to do channeling and to bring forth wisdom and energy that way. Did they really wait 2,000 years, or have they come back in previous times trying to give this message to humanity as well?
You know, that's a great question. It's not really noted so much in our book, but certainly in our experiences with them and many channeling sessions that we do, you know, with our membership program, there's always questions that members have, and they ask about, you know, their lives and their teachings. It hasn't really come up so much in that direct way, like, oh, I incarnated into X person on the planet. But how they do explain it is that the multidimensional soul is so vast in nature, and, you know, we have so many frequencies and threads that make up the soul, that perhaps part of their energy stream, or soul stream, as Tim Freak likes to call it, lived in a being on the earth plane. I know that's a little bit esoteric, but, you know, imagine our biofield is just, it's always busy. You know, as the beings say, we're always here. We never really go anywhere. We're always in your field. And so imagine their souls being in the auric fields of other spiritual masters and teachers who have once walked the earth plane.
I can see them not incarnating again, but what about channeling again? I mean, being brought through by a channeler in another time frame.
Oh, sure. You know, Edgar Cayce channeled Yeshua, as far as we know, and others of his ilk have channeled Yeshua over the years. I haven't heard people channeling both Yeshua and Mary Magdalene together, you know, but that certainly could be the case. And I think, or at least not in a full embodied channeling way, in the way that Anthony does it. So I think that's kind of unique. But certainly there's many people who have channeled Yeshua and Mary Magdalene over the years, I believe.
Well, you know, there are lots of Cleopatras too. So
yes, there is.
Yeah, lots and lots of them. But I found it fascinating that they could experience physicality through you, so that in spirit they don't feel the physicality, but if they're coming through you, they can feel the physicality through you. Is that appropriate?
Yes, they can literally do everything that I do. And I mean anything. They can drink, they can eat, they can walk, they can sleep. You name it.
Barbara was asking me earlier before we started this interview, she was saying, do they ever come through in the car when you're driving? And I said, yes, they do.
Yes, they do.
That has happened. Now, that wasn't always the case, and nor would it have always been possible. You know, like Edgar, Cayce, the sleeping prophet, who really had to lie down to receive these visions. It was very similar to that for Anthony in the very beginning. We had to sit in the dark. We couldn't have the light on. There couldn't be any sudden movements that would startle him, because he would be in between dimensions and absolutely terrified if, you know, he wasn't sure where he was.
Yeah.
And so it was a process. It's not like this came just like that and suddenly, you know, they can come, you know, so quickly. You know, it's funny because I mentioned to you that we also have a podcast and we interviewed Daryl Anka, who channels Bashar recently, just a couple weeks ago. And it was so fascinating because even though he channels entirely different beings, the experience is similar. And there was one moment where I asked him, well, now you can just go in and out just like that. And he said, well, that's what 40 years buys you. So
Yes.
I think, you know, that's the process for most channelers, that in the beginning it changes and it morphs. And it has done for, you know, other channelers we know as well. It was much more challenging at the beginning. There's no way they would have come through in the car. You couldn't have even had your eyes open.
Yeah,
No, it's been a very long process.
I call it a click in. When I channel, I click in. Yeah.
Click in, yeah.
It's just,
I like
it's another dimension, another level of energy, another level of philosophy, if you will. So that it's kind of like dialing into where you want to come from and what you want to bring through. I think that it's important to kind of go a little bit into what her life was like. I mean, there are stories about what her life was like, from being a priestess in Egypt to, you know, just a 16-year-old girl who didn't know what was going on and at 16 became pregnant. So fill in a little bit about her story that she gave you. Well,
you know, that brings up kind of what we were saying earlier. You know, did she get pregnant at 16? Not in our channeled version of her life.
Mm-hmm.
So how she explains the discrepancies between how one might portray her life and another would be the timeline that we plug into when we're channeling and bringing the information forth. So in other words, and you probably remember, because I know you finished the book, which is so awesome that you did, there's a point towards the end, if you remember, Rochelle, the main character in the book, is asking, well, how do we know if this is true or real? And Magdalene responds by saying, well, is this story more true and real than another story that has depicted my life through channeling? And she said, one person may be tapping into a different timeline when they're bringing forth my story, which is really mind-boggling. I mean, you know, as we really try to bridge science and spirituality and stay completely grounded in the work that we do, an answer like that is not very grounded. Okay, I'll just say to a quantum physicist or a philosopher, or, you know, a scientist or a cosmologist, yeah, we're just, you know, she's just tapping into a different timeline, right? So a different timeline might have her, you know, having lived in Turkey, for example, and Mother Mary the same. So it is challenging to really respond to scientists and historians and academics in a way that makes sense when you get a response like that. And certainly we felt the same way.
I think what you're mentioning isn't too uncommon in relationship to quantum realities. Even Daryl Anka would say that Bashar is his future self, who somehow bored into this particular timeline to give a message. So even though these timelines are hypothetical, they seem to make sense in a quantum universe of realities,
where there's multiple, you know, the multiple worlds theory, string theory, all of this stuff kind of layered upon layered complexities that we don't truly understand yet. You know?
Renée and I certainly are not quantum theorists or particle theorists or cosmologists of any nature.
Although we are absolutely riveted by it and have no shortage of books on quantum physics and cosmology that we've read, we're, you know, still,
because we had to learn about this stuff as the beings were coming through, relating the quantum reality of the soul and who we are on this planet, because we really had no idea what they were talking about.
Well, I think also, in my opinion, and it's just my opinion, a book like yours, first of all, whoever reads it is going to be interested in the different philosophies, different stories about a time that we did not live in, maybe. But if I can make somebody think or curious so that they do their own research, then it served a purpose.
Yeah.
If it sends them into questioning inside of themselves what it is they actually believe, then bingo, we've done something. And if they come away with, hey, that's a possibility, then they've opened the door to potentiality that is phenomenal.
Yeah, well said, actually. We had our first negative review on Amazon, and Anthony was pleased with it, of course, but me as a former marketing person, I thought, well, this upsets the Amazon algorithm, and it's going to bring our score down and all of that. But the negative review was from a woman in England who said, well, this is not how I was raised to believe Mary Magdalene and Yeshua to be, and I really don't like that the authors had them married and had sexual relations. So I deleted the book. That was it. That was the review. And it was a 1-star, and I thought, oh man,
Well, you got a star. That's great. She read the book.
She did. I don't know that she completed the book based on what she said, because all of that stuff is in the beginning, really.
But that's cool. If she read the book, even part of it, that it made her question. And and that's our point, actually. Everybody has a different level of conceptualization on all of this. And
well, I mean, the fact that she said that's not how I was taught, or that's not how I learned about religion. Well, there's a lot of things that we were taught in one way, only later to discover when we go out on our own and expand and travel and go to different cultures and have all these different experiences, that we learn there's perhaps another reality or another perception that's out there.
Let me put it this way. I wouldn't bake bread the way they did 2,000 years ago. I wouldn't travel to another country the way they did 2,000 years ago. Why should I accept only it's to the victor belongs the history. Yeah. And certainly the history has been overcome and overcome and overcome from Aramaic to I don't know, all of the different languages that it had to be deciphered from. Why not?
Yeah, of course.
It's another page. And if you put all the pages together, maybe they make sense and there's a whole story there. But I love the fact that she was outraged that she had been, defiled and dragged through the mud and, called a whore and all of that, when all she was doing was following her heart. I mean, gee, Christmas.
Yeah, I know. Jiminy Christmas is right? And it begs the question, you asked earlier, why write the book? I think, it fell upon us initially, but then what it unraveled into was, wow, like how many other pivotal women were left out of history and holy books conveniently. And so I think it really, she serves as an example of other women that now I'm eager to know their story too.
So I imagine Joan of Arc is on your calendar.
Well, it's interesting because she said that she did have her soul's essence in Joan of Arc. So there you go. She feels a little bit like a Joan of Arc, doesn't she?
Yeah, most definitely.
No, I think that it's amazing that, and how it was fascinating that she had 7 women that traveled with her, all from kind of wealthy families that were helping to fund their ministry of going around and ministering to people. And I loved, there were a couple of places where I raised my eyebrows. And, it was kind of like, that's not what I've read, but that doesn't mean it can't be the case. And one of them was, I had always, in most of the books that I've read, and I've read a couple, it was Joseph of Arythea that took Mary to Gaul. And you have her getting there a different way, which makes perfect sense too, that they had to go by foot. Well, not across the water, of course, but at least to the seaside, and then they took a boat and they hugged the shoreline all the way to Gaul. But I had that was a severe change in what I had heard or read, and I found it fascinating that they were taken in as they went along. And anybody who's ever gone to hostels or backtracked through Europe, people take you into their homes and treat you like your family. And,
they do. Yeah.
And it's not a surprise that it was that way back then.
Yeah, I think that, certainly from my background living that way, and I think there's even a point in the book where Magdalene says to Rochelle, didn't you learn that from your own travels, right? It might sound far-fetched and not believable to many modern people's ears, but for those of you who have ventured out on your own and traveled, you know this to be true. And that happened to me all the time. I'd meet a family in Croatia on the train, and they would, invite me over for dinner, and then I was staying with them suddenly. Things like that used to happen to me all the time. So imagine 2,000 years ago, it felt very conceivable that a family would take in women who were pregnant and needing to have birth, right, while they're on the road. I mean, especially if it was the wife of, in air quotes, of Jesus, who they had heard about. They had heard about Yeshua's work and his healing, even over in Gaul. So that word spread through the fishermen, right, who would do these routes back and forth all the time. And then the stories of Yeshua as this healer, really, this healer and this teacher. So yeah, it was kind of news to us because we hadn't read anything about her or how she might have gotten anywhere. We hadn't read anything about that. And so it was pretty.
And I don't think it's uncommon either that many of the women back then were supporting Yeshua and his teachings financially.
Yeah.
And you see that also today in many spiritual groups. There are many, many women that still are supporting the teacher, bankrolling the teacher, and helping the teacher to get the message out. So again, I don't think it was very uncommon that women would do that as well. And
I mean, she did say not all of them.
Not all of them, no.
Yeah, not all of the female sisters came from wealthy families.
No.
She was pretty clear about that. And some were orphaned too and came from nothing. But there were a few, I think she said it.
Yeah.
My understanding is it came from a few different families, including her own, that her mother found money, right, that her father didn't know about it, and it found its way to Gaul that way. And so I thought that was interesting, that it was really her mother who was supporting her from afar.
She never really spoke a great deal about Joseph of Arimathea too much, although I believe he was a Pharisee, and he was one of few who did support Yeshua on his journey, and he did believe in him a great deal.
I think it was he that went and asked if they could take the body down off the cross and bury it before sunset. And I do believe it was a tomb of his that they put the body in, according to what I've read. Now, I wasn't there.
There is research that does suggest that as well, that he had a tomb that was prepared for either himself or someone else.
Yeah, on his property.
That they put him into that tomb specifically. And that was during the time when, in the Hebrew and Jewish tradition, the body had to be prepared with all different types of oils and scents,
linen.
and it would be placed into a tomb where after about a year, the only thing that would be remaining were the bones. The bones would be collected and they would be put into an ossuary, which was a bone box. And that was the custom back then during that particular time in Jewish history.
Yeah, it's fascinating. You make it so real with their descriptions of what was going on and stuff like that. I think the thing that in almost everything that I've read, I mean, it's serious material and it's important historical stuff that we want to learn, but Jesus' story was love and laughter. And I think that's where I see so many books, they don't go into the laughter and the joy that was in his ministry.
That's true.
I mean, yes, there was grumbling that they had to walk a lot and that they didn't eat right and the whole thing. But at the same time, his message is one of love and joy. And the joy, every now and then you can see how there was joy, there was celebration, there was a camaraderie that was really wonderful. And I think
I love that there's a part in the book, if you recall, where Lazarus is telling his story, and then Yeshua kind of steps in and wants to add some additional fodder, to the story. And he says something along the lines of, as hard as this is to believe, it was like a reunion, a joyous reunion. He said, can you imagine, right, that, my Merkabah body appeared during that time when Lazarus had come to visit Miriam in Gaul so many years later, that they celebrated with a feast, and it was like his resurrection all over again. And so you could sort of imagine the scene too, that all of these years, finally they're reunited in Gaul, and Yeshua's Merkabah body shows up to celebrate with all of them.
Didn't want to miss a good party.
Especially if there's good wine, which we hear from them. There wasn't any good wine back then, but it was safer than the water.
They said it was bitter.
Yeah.
I think. And
didn't have the time to ferment it as long.
Yeah.
And allow it to reach a certain peak of, how would you call wine?
Well, and they didn't have wooden barrels.
No, they certainly didn't.
Or maybe they did, but certainly not the way that we go through the wine process today.
No.
I think it was ceramic bowls, or not bowls, but pots of some sort.
Yeah.
Most likely, yes.
No, I was really fascinated with, who was it that came and brought all sorts of cloth and everything, and visited her in Gaul.
That was Lazarus, who came from.
Was that Lazarus that brought the cloth and everything?
The cloth, the shoes, the ornamented shoes, the materials, the silk, all of it.
Yeah. He wasn't aware of cold weather, obviously.
Yeah, and how she describes it is that we felt like, princesses and queens. We didn't have that. That was all about kind of working the land, and then to show up with all of these beautiful, colorful, vibrant materials made all the women just feel, you can imagine that, right? You can absolutely imagine that, that, he had the money to do that. He probably saved money over time, but it's hard. It is hard to imagine on some level, and on another level, it felt completely plausible to me.
Well, and the one myth that she absolutely destroyed was she did not live in a cave for 30 years.
That's right. She was pretty emphatic about that, and would say, do you think that I would actually live in a cave for 30 years?
And raise a child there when I didn't need to do so?
Yeah. They stayed in people's houses while their house was being built. So, it was what happened to Sarah. She got married, and I to a wealthy family, according to you guys. is her bloodline still around? I mean,
well, it's funny because Magdalene's keeping a lot of that from us for some reason. She can be frustrating that way. But the third book, so the first book, obviously this one, the second book is all that we're working on now is all going to be dedicated to Yeshua and his teachings. And then the third book is going to be part 2 of this, which I believe we're going to go deeper into Sarah's life and into some of the teachings, which will probably be controversial in nature. I think she feels like this book needs time to sit with people before she comes out with some of the bolder teachings around sexuality and probably around her daughter's upbringing and, her later life in what is now England. So it's a coming, apparently.
well, there is a spring, I mentioned earlier, there's a spring in England, someplace that is the spring of Jesus. And the story goes that he traveled with Joseph of Arimathea on a lot of his trading journeys. And so he did go to England at some point in time. I know I've always believed that he did, of course, study in China and Tibet. And there is a temple in Tibet that has like a guest book that he has signed. And who was it that found it? Nicholas Rooric, on one of his journeys into the mountains in Tibet, did visit that temple and did see. They showed it to him.
Wow, it's amazing.
So that
yeah, we never got into any of that. So it's possible, right?
But Yeshua does come through, and he is starting to speak about
his time in Asia,
his time
mostly
India.
Mostly India, but he did say he went through Persia and there were other treks that he made. Hasn't brought up England, actually, but that doesn't mean that it's not going to come up in book 2. It's just, there's only so much that you can cover in one book. And as it was, I was like, I remember saying to Magdalene one night, we're approaching 400 pages. We live in a world where, and she said, it's my story. It can be as long as I want it to be.
Well, it's a never-ending story, actually.
It's a never-ending story. So I think there's more to come. I think certainly in book 2, we're going to go more into Asia with Yeshua. In book 3, I think we're going to go more into her life.
In France or Southern Gaul.
France, which will include, I'm sure, more details.
I would check out some of the paintings of Nicholas Rooric, because they if you realize that he was in the same place that Yeshua was, the paintings are just mind-boggling. I fell in love with them. There still is a museum in New York City in a brownstone that have a lot of his works in them, and he painted in tempera. And so he carried his canvases and the tempera in donkey bags, and he melted snow to mix the paint. And it wasn't one of your more popular museums. But I found it and I went to it. I also got kicked out because I had to touch one of them. And come on a donkey, the Himalayas, give me a break. And I saw
they threw you out. They literally threw you out.
Yeah, but I saw everything first. I saved that for last. It was like, I just have, and the person I was with said, don't do it. And it was like, nobody sees me. Nobody's here. Just stand in front of me. I just want to touch the canvas. And I did. And it felt so old. I could smell the Himalayas. It was worth getting kicked out.
Barbara, that would have been me, and Anthony would have been the one over there saying, don't do it.
It's not going to end well.
And I would have been right with you saying, you know what, it's worth it.
I'd seen everything, but I've seen a lot of his paintings are all over the internet, so you can see them all over the place. But there was a mysticalness about him that was just amazing. And Rooric was Russian, and he actually designed costumes for the Russian ballet. And he and his wife traveled the Himalayas and visited all of these mysterious places. They were among the founders of the Theosophical Society.
Fascinating.
So, the fact that he ran into Jesus, signed the guest book too. I mean, I just think that's so cool.
Well, Asian trips are also coming, so we'll have to tune back in after that and let you know what we discover.
Well, Jesus taught basically love, and he taught peace. And these days, those are two concepts that are talked about but not practiced as much as they could be, should be, would be. So your book does bring about the reminder that that's where our source is. That's where our spirits are, and that was our purpose. And you did bring about one thing that I found fascinating, and it's his purpose was to share peace and love, but not to die for the sins of humanity, which I found that fascinating.
Well, I think it's, there's a big piece that I feel, how do I put this? I think there's a few things happening with the book. One is to correct wrongs, right? Mm-hmm. Or, of course, right and wrong is always subjective, of course. But to, I think, I guess, correct things that have been misunderstood or wrongly projected in a way that excludes others. So I don't know, my thing about right and wrong is really about inclusion versus exclusion, or love versus fear. So less subjective in that perspective, at least from my view, right? It's like love and inclusion. And I think this whole piece of, it really resonated with me because I went through a period or a chapter in my life when I was young. I went to a born again Bible camp, and I wasn't raised that way. I was baptized Episcopalian, Lutheran, Methodist, went to a Catholic school for good measure. So I had all of those under my belt, but then this born again Christian camp. And I remember just feeling, similar to what Elaine Pagels went through in writing her recent book that just came out. I'm reading it right now, actually. And she talks about the same thing. She loved the evangelism, the commitment to Jesus, this commitment to God, this passion that comes with a lot of these evangelical movements. And yet the moment, Elaine writes about this, and this was directly my experience too, the moment they say, Jesus died for our sins, you're sinners, and if you don't bring this, Jesus into your heart and go through this whole process, you're going to hell. And that was when I booted, just like Elaine Pagels booted too. It was time to leave, right? I was no longer signing up for this. It just didn't make any sense to me as a teenager. Even after I went through all the words, I did all the stuff at Bible camp and went through all of this. And I think that's why he's so adamant about it. I feel like it's been a divisive factor. It's been, you're sinners, God is external, it's fearful, you're going to be judged on Judgment Day. All of these things, right? These don't make sense coming from a loving God.
No.
It just doesn't make sense. So I think that's the big reason why, he repeats it throughout the book over and over and over again, as does Magdalene, that he did not die for the sins of humanity. He died for what he believed in.
Yeah.
And so, that was repeated at the end several times as well. Anyway, that was just, it's kind of an emotional thing for me because I personally went through it. And I think many people have gone through similar situations, whether it's evangelical Christianity or something similar, where every other group is wrong and going to hell, and only if you're part of our group, will God love you. And that's just not healthy for a united humanity in any way, shape, or
And I think that's one of the things that I'm so heartbroken over, is that, you know, we are so divided these days that the element of love is so conditional in so many places and times that, you know, I once said to my son once when he did something that it was wrong, I said, you know, I will always love you, but right now I don't like you a lot. And he said, but you'll always love me. And I said, always, but I don't like you right now. And he said, I can live with that. But you know, I think it's something, I think what makes me so angry is it's the simplest truth out there, and yet people don't learn it. They say it, they talk it, they preach it, they don't practice it.
Right.
And
yeah, that's so true.
And it's just, with all that's going on today, and all the hurt and sadness and things that are going on, you know, it's time that we started to look inside of ourselves and find the love. And I'm not saying that we don't punish things that are horribly wrong, because I think we should, but I'm against the death penalty, because that sends the person on to his next life. That's escape. I think, you know, you want to punish somebody, keep them here. You know, let them live their life out, going over and over and over what they did. Don't give them an easy out. You know, and it's not death is not a punishment. It's an escape hatch, and so I don't believe in it. But which means I don't sit on any trials or whatever that have to do with the death penalty, but they don't let me on there anyhow, because I'm a psychic, and, you know, I've had some fun with judges. But the aspect of love is so important and so simple. And
it is simple, yeah.
Yeah. I think the message that always comes through both Yeshua and Miriam is that love is the most important energy there is that we share as human beings, and that exists in the universe itself. That it's so simple, but it's so hard to practice on a daily basis. So it is a spiritual practice that you do every single day, morning, afternoon, evening, and night. So it becomes a part of who you are. And these are the messages that he tried to give 2,000 years ago in a language that they could understand, and in a language that he spoke. But today the language is different, but the message is still the same. He will always end his transmission with, be of grace, be of gratitude, be of service,
And be of love.
and above all, be of love, and share these qualities of who you are as a human being with others.
Yeah, even when it's just the two of us sitting on the couch late at night, drinking a glass of wine, you know, enjoying our evening or whatever. And if Yeshua pops through, that's how he leaves us. It's always the same message. And they often, so, you know, it doesn't differ, I guess, is what I'm saying, whether we're with our students or doing a membership program, a live session. It's always the same message. And then often he'll also add, and be humble. Make sure you keep it.
Humble is good. Somebody once said to me, you know, that they felt they were highly evolved, and I said, good for you. And she said, but you're teaching all this, you're writing all this, you know, you have to be very evolved. And I said, nope, I'm not as evolved as the dandelion out there in the lawn. And you know, don't ever think that you are above somebody or something else, because you're going to find you're not. So, and when somebody said to me a long time ago, well, you're famous. And I said, nope, I'm well known, but I'm not famous. I'll take well known, but not famous. And it's humble is it's safer. The pedestal isn't so high to fall off of. I mean, if you're on a pedestal, guaranteed you're going to fall off. And
We see it all the time with spiritual masters. You see
Oh, yeah.
things
Yeah.
and teachers, the whole sexual assault thing with the male guru. It's still happening. Still
yeah.
happening to this day. It's not like it's gone away, right?
Yeah.
And so whenever we hear that, we're always like, we're getting closer and closer all the time to respect from science, bridging that gap between science and spirituality. We're getting closer. And so, those of us in the spiritual community, I feel like it's with great responsibility that not only are we ethical, but, we don't cross those boundaries, right? When we're working with people who are in vulnerable situations, we have an ode or an ethic to ourselves to do that. So I think, you can't, I don't know. It's kind of ruins it for those people who are really aching to do the work and here to help people heal, when you hear stories about that. So,
Well, I always sign off with letters with love, light, and laughter. And it's got to be a little of all of them, but love especially, because my goodness, without love, we're nothing. We're empty. We're pointless. There's no point to being here. So, and every lesson that comes your way is really saying, congratulations, you've moved to a new level. Let's step up. It's not punishment. It's, hey, you're done with this. Let's get on to the harder stuff. So it's
well, and also the one other message that we haven't talked about, which I think is vital through the book and all of their teachings, is the interconnectedness of all living things, that we are all connected. And I think that message is super important right now. And again, this is regardless of your political views. We never get political. We just don't do that. And if guides come through you and they have a political agenda, then chances are it's not a guide you want to be working with, right? Because how can that be for the highest good? So I would say for those who are feeling that, oh my gosh, what's going on out there right now, regardless again of how you believe, I think it's really focusing on this interconnectedness and feeling that there is no separation, because once we've experienced that, whether it's through an ayahuasca journey, MDMA, meditation, right? The connection with a unicorn. I mean, I don't care what it is, if it's connecting you to your divine self or your higher self, you will feel and inherently know the interconnection of all living things. And from that point, you can't have racial prejudice. You can't want to split mother and child up at borders or, whatever, is happening in the world. Your heart is pouring forward. You realize that you are not separate from the other, and you want to be there to serve humanity, right? Not divide it. And I think that's what we need to focus on. It's not about taking sides. It's not about getting angry. It's not about making one side wrong or the other right. It's about focusing on the light and the love that we are here to emanate in the world. And that dissipates the fear automatically, I think.
Well, I think also I can't do anything about a lot of the things that are going on in the world today, but I can do a lot about my own little world here, and the people that I touch and the people that I work with. And, if you start there, it grows. It's almost like a fungus. I mean, it will grow, but don't think you have to make a big splash. Just make a ripple, and that ripple keeps going.
Yeshua must be working through you, because that's exactly what he would say if he were here.
Oh, wow.
He would say, you touch one soul at a time. And when you touch one soul at a time, you touch the universe.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Because everything is interconnected.
It is. And something simple. One of my favorite things to do in the grocery store is to see somebody shopping all by themselves and tell them how pretty they look, or how pretty the color and to just keep walking. And you can feel the glow as you go by. It's the coolest thing. And it costs absolutely nothing. And, you just feel like I can take joy from their joy, which is even more fun.
Yeah.
So, I think that we have to look at what can we do. We have our own community around us. We have our own family. Start there. You don't have to go global. Just start there. And, the more you expand that way, if everybody's doing the same thing, we've got it made. Another couple thousand years will be perfect.
There's one other thing I wanted to mention about Magdalene. And when she does come through me, she's very woman, and she's adamant about the equality of women to men. And she'll speak about, not in so many terms, but the ascension of the balancing of women and men together. And she's very pro-woman about that. Although she does understand that men need to be in this process as well.
And have a vital role to play.
Yeah.
So she doesn't exclude men,
No.
but, one of the things that, because he's a full embodied channel, and she works through me too, but sometimes when we're speaking at events, people expect that, he comes through with Yeshua, and then they expect me to go into a full embodied state and bring forth Magdalene. And when that doesn't happen, sometimes people are confused. And so we have learned over time that I think the main reason, she will say this, and that's also been our experience, that she comes through a man is A, because she can, Anthony allows it, but B, I think it's even bigger than that. It's to demonstrate to the world not to fear the feminine, but to embrace it. And if an alpha male Italian from the Bronx can embrace Miriam of Magdala from 2,000 years ago, a strong, feisty woman who's like, just ready to set the world on fire, then it sends a message to other men. It's okay, right?
Yeah.
It's okay. It's a powerful part of integration, and even how she's made you feel coming through you.
Yeah, it's a very, it's hard to describe, but she's a very strong energy with enormous amounts of love to give.
Passion.
And passion, very passionate. But she's also a very big teacher. She's like a coach that will push you beyond your limits.
And sometimes is tough, like a lot of tough love.
A lot of tough love.
Like if we're ever having a moment, she'll be like, no more pity parties. And she'll say this to our community too. We have a community called Magdalene Sisters, which is for women only. And we have our Blue Soul Ignite is for men and women. But, when she does come through and someone's giving too much of a pity party, she'll say, okay, you have work to do, right? We all have work to do. Stop your pity party. I'm here to kind of raise your spirits up, but to remind you that you're spirit and that you have no fear. And so she is like a coach.
Because I had a lot of pity parties.
Yeah, you did.
In the beginning. She would tell me, Anthony, you need to grow your hair and you need to grow a beard. I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. Because many years ago, it wasn't like that for me. But as time went on, I could understand why she wanted this, why she wanted me to grow my hair longer and grow a beard. Because you start to incorporate the energies that they once were during their time.
That makes
And you
sense.
can start to feel it more and become it. And I believe that's what she wanted for me as well. And everything that has come through us from both Miriam and Yeshua has really come to pass in our lives.
Yeah, that's true too.
Everything.
That's true.
It's just amazing. It's an incredible journey.
We did go through a very long patch where we were channeling everything. I mean, everything was coming through in the early days before we really honed in on what's ours to do, right? A lot of students will ask us and people in our community, what's my purpose?
Right.
And I think for us, it was realizing, hone in and get more narrow in our channeling and focus on the balance of the masculine and feminine. And I think for us, it was through, I hate to use the word correction, but really a more heartfelt human perspective on what happened 2,000 years ago and really what shaped the Abrahamic religions in a way that has divided us and not united us. And I think that was really the reason we came full circle and started working with Yeshua and Magdalene directly, because we went through a period where Anthony was bringing forth everything. And I'm like, there's gods and goddesses in our living room tonight, Palladians and Arcturians the next night. Finally, I'm like, it's too crowded in here. It's just too crowded in here. So we did go through this phase of, bringing forth and working with lots of different energies in the early days. So it has definitely simplified our life on some levels, just working with these beings, but it's also complicated it because we're working with beings who have a religious connection.
Yeah.
Right. And there's a lot of triggers around the word God and Jesus. Some people can't even say the words.
And when you are on the spiritual path, it's always changing.
Yes.
And the more you understand your spiritual path, you start to understand who you are in this lifetime and your relationship to your ancestors as well. And so I've learned a great deal about who I am, who my ancestors once were, through all of the channeling that Renée and I have done together.
Which might happen for people going on the spiritual path. If you have insights, go to Egypt for some reason, or Ireland or India or whatever. It's your higher self's way of saying, explore, go, see what touches you, see what moves you, see what you're passionate about, see what's going to unravel for you, and then more is going to unravel.
Oh, yeah. Well, I've had people say to me, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. And then I'll say, what does that mean? And, they just look at me like, well, it means I'm spiritual. I said, yeah, but what does that mean? How are you living it? How does it change? Where is your faith? And they just kind of look at me and I say, maybe you ought to go and define spiritual before you claim to be it.
Yeah, there's often a divide people seem to perceive when they become spiritual, that they must let go also of the religious aspect of who they are. Yeah. But you don't.
No.
It is through your own religion and your own background and cultural norms.
And faith, to use Barbara's word. Yeah.
You don't have to let go of one for the other. There's always a combining of energies to continue leading you on your spiritual path of self-discovery.
Well, as Yeshua says in the book, use whatever from your religion that serves you and supports you, and leave the rest.
But they also talked about paganism and the Gnostics, and and the Essenes. There were elements of everything that fit, and everybody, I believe, has to create their own journey, their own wagon train, so to speak. And a little of this and a little of that resonates. So I'll put it all together, and that's going to become, the foundation of my faith and where I go and how I practice it. And it's, yes, you don't have to walk away from anything, walk to something and bring everything you got with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just noticed the time. Can you guys give out your contact information so people know where that they can find you?
Absolutely. So people can learn more at wrong website. We do a lot of different things here. I also run a travel magazine, so I nearly gave you that URL. That's not the right one for this show. No. So it's bluesoulearth.com. Bluesoulearth.com is our main website, and then studywithspirit.com is where we put a lot of our guided meditations, and we have pre-recorded courses over there. That's also where you can learn about our membership programs. We have 2 of them, Magdalene Sisters and Blue Soul Ignite, where we meet in a sacred container like this, but not public. And people can ask the guides, questions, and it's a very interactive sacred container. So we do that. And then we also lead retreats as well. We're going to be doing one to the south of France with Mary Magdalene this fall. So for people who are interested in maybe learning more about the retreat and joining us, you can just email me at info@bluesoulearth.com, and we can give you information as it unravels, because we don't actually have the dates of that yet. And what else am I missing? Anything? Oh, the book.
The book.
Oh, you know what else I forgot?
Podcast.
You know what I forgot?
What?
Magdalene came to us 6 months ago, you won't believe this, and said, you're going to start making jewelry in my name.
Yes.
How could I forget that, right? I'm actually wearing some of it now. So we started making jewelry 6 months ago. And so that's themagdalenecollection.com. So www.themagdalenecollection.com. So that's a new part of our life too. That's been really juicy and fun and fascinating. And so I don't know if I've missed anything. Have I missed anything?
The people that we interview also.
Oh, Blue Soul. Yeah. So yes, thank you.
Very fascinating.
Yeah. So
individuals.
You can go to our YouTube channel. I know we have a lot, Barbara. YouTube.com/Blue Soul Earth. Please subscribe to Blue Soul Earth on YouTube because it's free. And we have a podcast over there too that bridges science and spirituality. So a little different than this style of format, and there is some content over there with Anthony channeling as well. So we encourage people to go over and subscribe to that because, as our videographer says, it's our best kept secret.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so very, very much. Just hang with me for a minute. I'm going to play the exit, and I'll talk to you for a couple of minutes before you go.
Sounds good. Thank you for this beautiful opportunity.
Oh, my pleasure.